all set to get ourselves underway here now in lesson number 5 in our History of Israel study. I'll take our sign down one more time, and I'll ask you to take your Bibles and turn with me, if you would, to Hosea and chapter 13. Now, what I want to do here at the beginning of this lesson is to kind of consolidate some of the things we were talking about last time with respect to the issue of God's Jehovah-ness and His grace. Last time we briefly went over the issue in Exodus chapter 3 regarding God's education of the nation Israel with respect to His Jehovah-ness. And I told you how that's an extremely important portion of God's Word with respect to His dealings with Israel. It's an extremely important portion to get an understanding and appreciation for, because the truth of the matter is Israel's only hope of ever being what God's plan and purpose calls for, Israel's only hope of ever being that great nation and being the means by which God's going to repossess the world and reconcile all its governmental authorities back to Himself and administer His righteous rule on this earth. In other words, Israel's only hope of ever being the nation in which the kingdom of God is vested and spreads out over this earth as the Abrahamic covenant calls for. Their only hope of ever fulfilling that lies in the issue of God's Jehovah-ness and His grace. God will have to be everything Israel needs Him to be, to deliver them from all their predicaments, deliver them from all their shortcomings, deliver them from their own impotency when it comes to being able to be that great nation. And God's going to have to do that. His Jehovah-ness, His name Jehovah, is spelling out the fact that He's got the capacity to be whatever they need Him to be, and He will be whatever they need Him to be. But they need to understand that and appreciate that and cast themselves upon His Jehovah-ness. And we saw that He has to give them the things they need by His grace. He has to, by His grace, make them into the holy nation they need to be to fulfill that plan and purpose. Well, that's a crucial thing to understand in preparation for realizing what Israel did when they signed that law contract. We always recognize that that's what Israel did. We recognize the situation at Mount Sinai there in Exodus chapter 19. We realize that Israel entered into a law contract with God, and we even realize the nature of that contract, the performance nature that contract is. But the truth of the matter is, Israel, if they understood the reality of their own situation and understood what God educated them in before they ever got to Mount Sinai, when that contract came down and the proposal was set before them to be dealt with by God on the basis of their own works, on the basis of their own performance, and to make themselves into that holy nation by their own deeds, if they had learned the lessons from Exodus chapter 3 all the way to Exodus chapter 18, if they'd learned the lessons about God's Jehovah-ness and His grace that He educated them in when He brought them out of Egypt and when He brought them from the Red Sea to Mount Sinai, they'd learned those lessons, they wouldn't have signed that law contract. They would have come along and said, there's no way in the world we can ever make ourselves into this great nation you plan and purpose us to be. There's no way in the world we can ever be that holy nation and that kingdom of priests on the basis of our own performance. And they would have if they understood the God's Jehovah-ness and His grace, if they understood the proving God put them through at the waters of Marah and so forth. They would have said, no way, we can't do that. That's not the way in which we could ever be what your plan and purpose calls for. But they didn't learn the lesson. And then signing that law contract made it so they had to go through a series of history, really, not just a series, a history of punishment and chastisement and grief and horrible times in their history. Learning it the hard way, really, is what it comes down to. Now, I'm talking very, very basically in connection with those things, and once again, it's all we're able to do and all we're designing to do in this study. But you do need to have a grasp upon the issue of God's Jehovah-ness and the significance of that name. And if you don't have a grasp on the significance of that name, even some very common expressions that you run into in the Old Testament scriptures, for example, calling upon the name of the Lord, those expressions will pass you by. The meaning that's really there, the issue that's really there in calling upon the name of the Lord, it'll escape you. If the name of the Lord, the issue of His Jehovah-ness and everything, really isn't appreciated by you. Well, we're only looking at some basics in connection with this, and I hope there's something that's taken a grip upon your understanding, and you're gaining an appreciation for them. But before we go on and look at the things that actually comprise the education that God gave to Israel before they signed that law contract, I want you to look at a passage that kind of summarizes the whole matter of God's Jehovah-ness, especially that matter pertaining to I am blank. You remember last time in Exodus chapter 3, I pointed out to you how that the Jehovah-ness issue has two aspects to it, or two parts to it. The first part has to do with timelessness. That very name Jehovah, I am that I am, the eternal, self-existent, always in the present one, so to speak. That underscores the fact that time is not something that has any effect upon God. And therefore he's always faithful to His promises. And whatever He promised, He will perform. It will come to pass. Time may be something that causes us trouble. Time was something that caused the children of Israel some problems. But time isn't something that causes God problems. And His very name Jehovah addresses that issue first and foremost. And the idea of one day being as 1,000 years with the Lord, and 1,000 years as one day, that issue of timelessness and it not being a burden to God and not causing Him any problems, that's wrapped up in that name Jehovah. And I told you last time how that when you're in the book of Exodus there and you're going through the things once Moses comes back into Egypt and begins to tell the children of Israel what God had said to him, and then the process begins to go through in which God judges Egypt's gods there and makes His power known and gets the reputation for Himself and for His nation that He wants, that along with those things and all the plagues and so forth there, along with those things, there's also an impression upon Israel. An impression is made upon them regarding the outstanding nature of that aspect of God's name, Jehovah, and His faithfulness to do what He said. And they're confronted with having to rely upon that, regardless of how things were looking with the delay and Pharaoh's heart being hardened and so forth. The children of Israel there were having to sit down, so to speak, and say, God said this. He's promised it. And His very nature is one of faithfulness to do what He said. He cannot lie. And they had to rest in that issue. And they were confronted with that during that time. Once they came out of Egypt, though, and once the Red Sea had closed behind them, and then they were on their way through the wilderness down to Mount Sinai there, Exodus chapter 15 through chapter 18, those 4 chapters, 15, 16, 17, and 18, those 4 chapters record some things that Israel went through, which are really trials for their education. Trials very similar to the things to the trials that they went through in Egypt there. But the education now is focusing upon the other aspect of God's Jehovah-ness, the other thing that's wrapped up in that name Jehovah, which is the I am blank concept, that unlimited capacity that name is conveying to Israel. I am and will be whatever you need me to be. And it's really in that section, we'll be spending some time on that here in this lesson, it's really in that section that the issue of the filling in the blank of after I am begins to be impressed upon Israel. And those 7 Jehovah titles that you find in the Bible for Israel, beginning with Jehovah Jireh all the way to Jehovah Shammah. You don't have all 7 of them dealt with there in that passage. I'm not saying that, but that issue is there in Exodus 15 through 18. And you do have one of those Jehovah names impressed upon Israel, the Jehovah Nissi concept. And we'll see that in just a few minutes as we go on here. But like I said, I want you to look at a passage with me here in Hosea, in which this issue regarding that aspect of God's Jehovah-ness is kind of all wrapped up in one passage. And God comes along and talks to Israel and says, I'll be this for you. I'll be this other thing for you. You need this, I'll be this for you. And that's what his name Jehovah is standing for. I am blank. What do you need me to be? I'll be it for you. Hosea chapter 13. You're near the end of Hosea's prophecy here. And when we get to the issue of dealing with Leviticus 26 and the 5 courses of punishment that comprise Israel's history, Hosea was a prophet who was raised up contemporary with Isaiah, and he talks about the commencement of that 5th course of punishment upon the nation Israel. And he talks about things that are going to be going on throughout the duration of that 5th course, right up into and including the day of the Lord, the day of the Lord's wrath, that period of time that's out here, that's still yet to take place and won't take place till after the mystery dispensation of grace in which we live is concluded by God. But that day of the Lord out here is the final aspect of that 5th course of punishment. And then the Lord avenges his cause with Israel, purges his nation of all the rebellious element during that time, and establishes the kingdom out there, and they function in accordance with God's plan and purpose and the Abrahamic covenant out there in that kingdom. Well, Hosea, near the end of his prophecy, talks about something that the nation of Israel is going to have to realize and will realize out there in the day of the Lord. And what he talks about is the issue of God's Jehovahness. I mentioned to you last time how that since they didn't learn the lesson in Exodus 15 through 18 before they signed the law contract at Mount Sinai, they got to learn it the hard way. And the truth of the matter is, the only part of the nation Israel that ever really learns it and ends up confessing it and admitting it and everything is the remnant out there in the day of the Lord. Well, Hosea's got that in view here in the passage that we're going to be looking at. Hosea chapter 13, and pick it up here in verse 9. O Israel, thou hast destroyed thyself, but in me is thine help. Now, the rest of the verse is what I want to go over and deal with, but you need to understand and appreciate that statement there. That's the Lord's introductory statement to the issue of an expose on his Jehovahness. First part of verse 9 says, O Israel, you've destroyed yourself. And they have, as we'll see once again here. Let this little mountain here represent Mount Sinai there. When they entered into that law contract, they signed a contract in which if they didn't perform what that law contract said, if they didn't do the statutes, the judgments, and keep the testimonies and so forth there, God had the right to, and they expected God and wanted him to, according to that contract, to judge them accordingly. And even to the point of destroying them. And the Lord's talking about that now. That 5th course of punishment is coming upon the nation now at this time. And they're in the position, they destroyed themselves. Their own performance, lack of good performance, has destroyed them. But note the last part of verse 9. But, adversative conjunction, in me is thine help. In me. I'm your help. You need help? You've destroyed yourself. You need help? It's in me. See, that's the issue of his Jehovahness. That's the I am whatever you need me to be. In me is your help. There's the blank at the end of the word am there. Fill it in. What do you need? I'll be it. That's the issue here. Now look what he goes on and says. Verse 10, I will be thy king. Man, you need a king? I will be thy king. Where is any other that may save thee in all thy cities, and thy judges of whom thou hast said, give me a king and princes? I gave thee a king in mine anger, and took him away in my wrath. The iniquity of Ephraim is bound up, his sin is hid. The sorrows of a travailing woman shall come upon him. He is an unwise son, for he should not stay long in the place of the breaking forth of children. I will ransom them from the power of the grave. I want you to notice as you go through the passage here, folks, every time God comes along and says, I'll be this or I'll do this, he's talking about his Jehovahness. What they need him to be, he'll be and do for them. I'll be your king. He demonstrated the incapacity of their own kings, and that they've got to have God as their king if there's going to be righteous rule, if there's going to be victory in connection with conflict and so forth. They got to have God as their king. I'll be your king. I will ransom them from the power of the grave. They're in a predicament in connection with their own sin, a predicament from which they can't extricate themselves. They can't do anything about it. I'll ransom them from the power of the grave. I will redeem them from death. O death, I will be thy plagues. O grave, I will be thy destruction. Repentance shall be hid from before mine eyes. Though he be fruitful among his brethren, an east wind shall come. The wind of the Lord shall come up from the wilderness, and his spring shall become dry, and his fountain shall be dried up. He shall spoil the treasure of all pleasant places. Samaria shall become desolate, for she hath rebelled against her God. They shall fall by the sword. Their infants shall be dashed in pieces, and their women with child shall be ripped up. Man, she sure does need help. And she needs someone to handle that situation that she can't handle on her own. And God's coming along and saying, man, I'll do it. I'll do it for you. Verse 1 of chapter 14. O Israel, return to the Lord thy God, for thou hast fallen by thine iniquity. Take with you word. This is the passage I referred to in the last lesson. The passage in which the issue of appreciating God's grace to them, and the fact that he has to deal with them on the basis of his grace, and he has to deliver them from the predicaments that they're in. They're going to confess that finally one day. It's going to be out there. The remnant is going to confess that out there in the day of the Lord. But the truth of the matter is that confession ought to be made back here at this time, back here before they ever entered into that law contract. Those things that are sitting back there in that time of Exodus chapter 15 through chapter 18. Those things that we're going to begin to look at in a few minutes. The time when God educated them in the issue of his Jehovah's and his grace. It's back at that time, at the end of the education, when they came to the foot of Mount Sinai there, that they ought to have said the very thing you'll see here now in verse 2 of Hosea chapter 14. Take with you words, and turn to the Lord, and say unto him, take away all iniquity, and receive us graciously. So will we render the calves of our lips. When they signed that law contract, they signed a contract in which they said, we won't do any iniquity. And you won't have to deal with us on the basis of grace. You can deal with us on the basis of our performance. That's what that law contract is, folks. That's a performance contract. Well, they learned things the hard way throughout their history. And finally, out here in the day of the Lord, which is what Hosea is looking out there at prophetically, they're going to bring the words to the Lord that they should have brought back at this time here. In fact, the Lord asked for their response at Mount Sinai there. He brought Moses up into the mount, uttered forth the principles and tenets of the contract, sent them down, and wanted to know what the people of Israel said, wanted to know what their words were in response to it. And Moses was to bring their words to the Lord. And of course their response was, all that the Lord has said, we will do. These words here that's going to say out this time are the words they should have said back here. And what they say is, take away all iniquity, and receive us graciously, so will we render the calves of our lips. That's what we need. We need you to take away all iniquity. We need you to do it. And we need you to receive us graciously. That's God's Jehovah-ness and his grace. And then we'll render to you the calves of our lips. Only that. It's the only way that'll be done. And of course that's what will go on out there in the kingdom. Asher will not save us. We will not ride upon horses. Neither will we say any more to the works of our hands, ye are our gods, for in thee the fatherless findeth mercy. And here's the rest of his Jehovah-ness spelled out here in connection with the deliverance and the blessing they'll get out there. I will heal their backsliding. I will love them freely, for mine anger is turned away from him. I will be as the dew unto Israel. He shall grow as the lily, and cast forth his roots as Lebanon. His branches shall spread, and his beauty shall be as the olive tree, and his smell as Lebanon. They that dwell under his shadow shall return. They shall revive as the corn, and grow as the vine. The scent thereof shall be as the wine of Lebanon. Ephraim shall say, what have I to do any more with idols? I have heard him and observed him. I am like a green fir tree. From me is thy fruit found. Who is wise? Look at the last verse here now. Who is wise, and he shall understand these things? Prudent, and he shall know them. For the ways of the Lord are right, and the just shall walk in them, but the transgressors shall fall therein. Note two things there in verse 9. The questions. Who is wise? He shall understand these things. Prudent, he shall know them. These things, all these things we just read there from verse 9 of chapter 13, the issues of God's Jehovah's and grace. The one who's wise will understand these things. The one who's looked at that law contract once again, the member of the nation Israel who's looked at that law contract and seen exactly what that thing is, and seen his impotence in connection with, and the nation's impotence in connection with that. What that individual will do is acknowledge the truth of what's been said forth here, and that Israel's destroyed herself, and in God is their only hope, and his name Jehovah declares that very thing. Notice the middle of verse 9. It says, for the ways of the Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital B, that's your Jehovah name there. For the ways of the Lord, Jehovah, are right, and the just shall walk in them, but the transgressor shall fall therein. Now, there's more to all this, of course, than we're pointing up. I'm just simply taking that issue of God's Jehovah, which is the central issue here. Taking that issue of God's Jehovahness and utilizing this marvelous passage, which the whole thing is summarized and put together in one package, really. And the truth of the matter is that you got just about all 7 Jehovah names sitting in these verses. Not necessarily sitting there as titles or as names, but as doctrinal expressions of what those names convey. All the I will this and I'll be this, and so that they're conveying those things. Well, this is a marvelous passage, and we'll have opportunity in the course of this survey, this short history of Israel survey, to refer to this passage again, and especially when we get over here to these prophets that were raised up when that 5th course of punishment began coming upon the nation. That's what the prophets Isaiah through Malachi are. You'll hear me talk about them like that and refer to them like that, and you need to understand them like that when we get over there. They're the 5th course of punishment prophets, and they deal with the details of the 5th course of punishment. But right now you don't have much of an understanding of that, and I realize that, but I'm saying some things that will be clicking for you in just a lesson or two. And hopefully they'll, by saying them in advance for you, not only will they click when you see those things, but you'll also realize the importance of them, and the importance of looking at things that way and having an appreciation for them like that. Well, come back with me now, if you would, to the book of Exodus one more time, Exodus chapter 15, and let's do a brief running survey of Exodus 15, 16, 17, and 18, and get an appreciation for this basic education God gave Israel, basic but comprehensive enough so they could make a wise decision based upon what they've gone through at Mount Sinai. And let's take a look at what they went through. Take a look at the emphasis upon God's Jehovahness, the education that he gave them at this time, and then we'll take a look at what took place there in Exodus 19 at Mount Sinai, and we'll see the issue concerning them signing that contract, which was a contract that stipulated that God was to deal with them not on the basis of his Jehovahness and grace, but on the basis of their own performance and merit. And that's the exact opposite of Jehovahness and grace. God's Jehovahness is his performance for you, and his grace is the issue of him giving you the benefit of that performance as a gift. The law contract is the exact opposite of that. It says you perform, and I'll give you what you merit, whether you perform good or bad. By the way, folks, the more you understand and appreciate those things, the more you understand the issue of us in this dispensation of Gentile grace in which we live today, not being under the law, but being under grace. And the more you understand and appreciate the grandeur of that and the magnificence of that. And what you got to do is begin to learn how God deals with you under grace. And that's what you got in Romans through Philemon, because that's the portion of God's word that pertains to this dispensation of grace. And it's in Romans through Philemon that God teaches you through the Apostle Paul, our apostle today, how to live under grace. You don't find how to live under grace back here in the law contract, because that's not a contract that operates on the basis of grace. There's a statement made by the apostle over in Hebrews chapter 10 that talks about the issue of those that transgressed the law of Moses died without mercy. The law contract didn't call for mercy, didn't contract for mercy or grace. Contracted for merit. And that's an entirely different system. Now, Exodus chapter 15. Exodus chapter 15. Let's take a look very briefly here at the song that Moses and the children of Israel sang when they came out of Egypt and God destroyed the Egyptians behind them there with bringing the waters of the Red Sea back down. And I want you to notice something here that's pertinent to our study beyond just the issue of God's Jehovah's and grace. I want you to notice Moses' understanding concerning what the purpose of God with his nation is. Exodus chapter 15, and we won't deal with the beginning of the song there. You can deal with that. It begins right there in verse 1, but come on down to verse 16, if you would, here, near the end of the song. Exodus 15:16. Fear and dread shall fall upon them. That's referring to the ones in the land, once again, they're going to. The dukes of Edom, the mighty men of Moab, and all the inhabitants of Canaan there. They're going to that land, and Moses understands and appreciates that. Moses has tremendous knowledge and comprehension concerning God's plan and purpose with the nation Israel. And he expresses a tremendous amount of that right here in this song. And he knows what they're going to. He knows the land they're going to. He knows that they're going to deal with those nations. He knows they're going to evict them, destroy them, and evict them out of that land, because God's claimed that land for himself. He understands what the plan and purpose of the nation Israel is, to establish God's kingdom on this earth in that land. And for the original plan and purpose of man was subduing the earth to be filled in this nation. Come on down, like I said, verse 16. Fear and dread shall fall upon them. By the greatness of thine arm they shall be as still as a stone, till thy people pass over, O Lord, till the people pass over which thou hast purchased. Thou shalt bring them in, and plant them in the mountain of thine inheritance, in the place, O Lord, which thou hast made for thee to dwell in the sanctuary, O Lord, which thy hands have established. The Lord shall reign forever and ever. That's a marvelous description in short words like that, in short statements like that, a marvelous summary description by Moses of God's plan and purpose of the nation Israel. They're going to go into this land once again, but it's not just land, that's just a piece of real estate that's no different from any other, or something along those lines. Verse 17, thou shalt bring them in and plant them in the mountain of thine inheritance. That's what that land is. And he's not just simply talking about, it's not just that it's just one mountain there. That's that mountain in the representative sense of a kingdom once again, like over there in Isaiah chapter 2. And Moses says, you're going to bring them in and plant them, establish them and plant them right there in the mountain of thine inheritance. And it's God's inheritance. In the place, he says, O Lord, which thou hast made for thee to dwell in. And remember back in Genesis 1 and 2, the issue, the original issue in God's creating the earth once again. He's creating his own abode. And it was going to function as a central point in the universe that he had created. And he created for him to dwell in. And for it to be his palatial residence. The usurper once again came in, usurped the dominion of the earth, but God's plan and purpose is still the same. And what he's going to do, he's got a place in which he's going to dwell in. It's still going to be the earth, but it's going to start off being that land that he gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And notice it's called the sanctuary, O Lord, which thy hands have established. Man, I wish we had time to deal with some further things in connection with verse 17 there, but I'm just simply pointing out the fundamental matters that are resident within the statements Moses is making here. There's more than just these fundamental things. There's some marvelous things to be expanded upon, especially the sanctuary issue. Because as the most holy and the most high, he's going to be resident within that land. And he's going to be destroying and demolishing the evil and the wickedness and the ungodliness of the satanic plan of evil on this earth. But Moses comprehended those things. He understood that's what Israel, God's ruler, God's princely nation, was all about. That's what it's all for. Well, following the singing of this song, Israel goes through some trials on the way down to Mount Sinai. After Miriam sings some songs herself, verse 22 describes the trip that they took, heading on down to Mount Sinai. And on the way, there are 5 things that took place. Now, I don't think we're going to have time in this lesson to go over each one of those things. I'm going to give them to you anyway, and briefly outline them for you here, and let you spend the time going over the details of it. But there are 5 trials for Israel's education here. The first one is what you got in verse 22 and down through verse 27 here of chapter 15. Which is the bitter waters of Marah incident. And the encounter of the bitter waters didn't take place for no reason at all. But it was the first trial for their education in the issue of God's Jehovahness when it comes to appreciating that name, I am blank. Fill it in. What do you need me to be? I'll be it. The second trial to educate them in that issue is chapter 16 and all 36 verses of it. It's the hunger they experience in the wilderness of sin. The third one is chapter 17 and the first 7 verses. There's another no water incident. And the first 7 verses of chapter 17, the no water at Rephidim. It's almost like a repeat of the first trial, and in a sense it is. They're stuck in almost the exact same situation they were in the first trial, and if they learn the lesson of the first trial and the second trial, it'll show up on this third one. Or if they didn't learn the lesson, it'll show up. And of course what showed up is they didn't learn the lesson. Well, we'll get to that, but that's the third trial, is the no water at Rephidim in chapter 17 and verses 1 through 7. The fourth trial is the rest of chapter 17, verses 8 and down through verse 16, the battle with Amalek. Now that's a critical trial, because the whole issue of Satan's policy of evil against them is manifest in that trial. And they're confronted with what they're going to have to do with the adversary. And the fact that they're in a battle with the adversary because of who they are in God's plan and purpose. And they're educated in the basics of that. And they're also educated in the fact that their only hope of ever succeeding in that battle is Jehovah Nissi, God's Jehovahness, functioning as their conquering hero. We'll see that, of course, but that's the fourth trial. The fifth trial is chapter 18, which is the issue concerning Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, and the things that take place in connection with that. And it's a trial that educates them in the fact that the only hope they ever have of being the blessing to the world that God's designed them to be is for His Jehovah's and grace to make the impression for them on those Gentiles. And that becomes evident in the situation regarding Jethro, Moses' father-in-law. Then you get to chapter 19, and that's when they come to Mount Sinai. And if they've learned their lesson, that law contract would be refused. Well, let's go over the lessons first and get to Mount Sinai there with a proper appreciation for what ought to be operating in their heads when that law contract comes down. Exodus chapter 15 once again. Look with me at verse 22. Let's take this first trial and let's survey it and get a basic grasp upon it here. Exodus 15:22. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? And he cried unto the Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, Jehovah. And the Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast into the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them, and said, If you will diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians, for I am the Lord, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D, that healeth thee. Jehovah Rophekah. That's the Jehovah title there, Jehovah name. And they came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water, and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the waters. All right? No water incident. I really shouldn't say it that way. There's water there, but they can't drink them. They're poisonous. They're bitter. And therefore, it really is a no-water situation in the sense that there's nothing for them to drink and satisfy their thirst and get the life-giving capacity of the water that they need. And they murmur against Moses, verse 24 says, saying, What shall we drink? All right. Here's the issue with God's Jehovahness. God's Jehovahness, once again, is his issue of his timelessness and his unlimited capacity. And that he'll be whatever they need him to be in whatever predicament they find themselves in. They've just been educated in the issue of his timelessness and his absolute faithfulness to what he's promised, and they've just seen the salvation of their God just as he promised Abraham he'd perform for them at the exact time he told Abraham he'd perform it. Well, now they're in a situation where the other half of that Jehovahness name, significance, begins to be the issue, and they begin to be educated in that. And when they ask, what shall we drink? If they had any comprehension at this time on the meaning of of his name Jehovah, and that the other aspect of it, his unlimited capacity, and I'll be whatever you need me to be, the issue wouldn't be what shall we drink, but let the Lord give us what we need. Tell the Lord to give us what we need. Now Moses knew what to do. Verse 25. And he cried unto the Lord, unto Jehovah, and the Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast into the waters were made sweet. Now there's more to that than just that there too. There's some representation there and everything, some typology in a sense that's there. And I don't think it takes much for you to figure that out and have an appreciation for that. But what I'm especially after is the impact that the whole provision is to have. And the impact of the provision is to magnify the issue of that aspect of God's Jehovahness. The waters were made sweet. Now they can drink, can't they? Now the issue isn't what shall we drink. Now they got something to drink. And the issue is the Lord, Jehovah, provided it for them, just like his name says. Now, the real issue for us to understand right now in connection with that is the end of verse 25 and verse 26. Because this is the beginning of Israel's education on this matter. And that's declared to you now, and it's declared to Israel when it took place, based on what the end of verse 25 and verse 26 says. And the verse 25 says, There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them. Now let's stop there for a second. The verse doesn't stop there. The verse does, but the concept doesn't. But stop there for a moment yourself. We're very familiar with the issue of statutes and ordinances, and the issue of commandments and statutes again that'll come up there in verse 26. What I mean by that is we realize that those are the things that comprise that law contract there that we'll come across in chapter 19, and it'll be described for you in detail with all its codes in the rest of Exodus, then the rest of Leviticus, and in Numbers, and also gone over again in the Deuteronomy, the second going over of the law. But the interesting thing is, folks, you don't have the law contract even brought down yet at this time. What I want you to realize is that God is beginning this education regarding His Jehovahness and the fact that He will be for them whatever they need Him to be. Israel's being educated in that, and the fact that that's what they actually need Him to be for them on the basis of contrast with the law. He makes for them here a statute and an ordinance. He doesn't bring down all 600 plus aspects of statute, ordinance, and commands that the law contract is going to have, but He makes a statute and an ordinance, and he talks about dealing with them on the basis of that, on the basis of a law, before He ever even proposes it at Mount Sinai. He talks about dealing with them on that basis. And actually what they got here in this very first trial for their education is a demonstration of God's Jehovahness on one hand, and now approving of them concerning the fact that that's what they have to have Him do for them, because if they're going to be dealt with on the basis of a statute and ordinance, they're going to fail. And they're going to end up getting into problems and predicaments they can't get themselves out of on the basis of that. That last expression in verse 25 is extremely important. We'll get to it in just a moment. Let's finish off the gist of the flow. There He made for them a statute and an ordinance. There He proved them, and said, if thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in His sight, and will give ear to His commandments. They haven't got any yet, but the issue is, if you will. And that's the principle on which the law contract operates. If you do this, then I'll do that. There's the performance system, and he's proposing, he's setting it before them there as a way in which He could deal with them, after having just dealt with them on the basis of His Jehovahness and grace. And they get the two, one on the one hand, the other on the other, and they're going to, in the rest of the trials, see which one is the best, and see which one they're able to deal with, to operate in connection with. And what they're going to see consistently is their absolute inability to have God deal with them on the basis of their keeping statutes, commandments, and ordinances. He proves that what's in them can't cut the mustard with that. And they've got to have Him deal with them on the basis of His Jehovahness and His grace. It's their only hope. If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in His sight, and will give ear to His commandments, and keep all His statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians. For I am the Lord that healeth thee. What that actual bitter water was, once again, folks, was fallout, really, from the judgment He brought upon the Egyptians. And they're confronted with having to be a partaker of that, and having to be affected by that when they come to these bitter waters of Marah. And what He's proving, what he's demonstrating to them, is that that's what they're going to be worthy of, unless they can keep all His statutes, all His commandments. If they're going to be dealt with by Him on the basis of their performance, the only way they will ever make it so they're not worthy of being dealt with just like the Egyptians were dealt with, is by keeping all His statutes, doing that which is right in His sight, and giving ear to all His commandments, and performing them all. And then you get the marvelous contrast at the end of the verse 26. For I am the Lord that healeth thee. I am the Lord, I'm Jehovah. There's your I am blank. And He fills in the blank this time. I'm Jehovah that healeth thee. I am the one that is your healer. That's what they're going to need him to be. They need to realize that by nature, they are in the exact same boat the Egyptians are in. God hasn't separated them out from the rest of the world because they're naturally righteous and naturally holy, and the rest of the world is naturally unrighteous and naturally unholy and ungodly. Truth of the matter is, by nature, though they're the seed of Abraham, they're also the seed of Adam. And they deserve, by merit, the exact same things all the seed of Adam deserves: the wrath of God, judgments and plagues, as God expends his wrath, just like is evident there with the Egyptians. The only way they're not going to be on the receiving end of that is if they appeal to the Lord to deal with them on the basis of his Jehovah's and his grace. Well, that's what they need to comprehend. That's what they need to be educated in, the reality of. And this first trial begins that education process. It begins the proving process. Look at that last expression now once again in verse 25. It says, and there he proved them. When it says he proved them, if I prove something, I prove the quality of it, generally, or prove what's in it. If I were to need a piece of metal, for example, that had to be strong enough to support my weight for some reason. Let's say I'm going to span a distance, for example, and I need to be able to go across that thing. And I want to make sure that it's going to be able to support my weight before I put my weight upon it and maybe put my life in danger, because if it gives way, I'll go down through some chasm or something along those lines. I'm going to test the thing out in advance. I'm going to prove it to make sure it can do what I need it to do. I want to prove what's in it and prove its worth, prove its metal in another sense. So what I might do is I might try and take the thing and bend it and snap it and break it myself. Or I might just stand on it on some blocks, for example, and jump up and down on it. And if it holds out, therefore, I can be pretty sure that I can span this other distance with a greater fall to it and be able to walk across it and not have it give away. I prove the thing. That's what's going on here. When God said there, he proved them. That's what he did. He put the issue now before his Jehovah's and his grace and their performance. A grace system, a merit system. His Jehovah's performing for them, their own performance providing for them. And now the issue is he's going to prove them for what's in them. And their eyes, and the eyes of their understanding, from this point on until they get to Mount Sinai, is going to be confronted with the reality of their situation. And the reality of their situation is they can't perform. They got to have the Jehovah's and grace. It's their only hope. That's if they learn the lesson and keep their eyes open. Come with me for a moment, if you would, to Deuteronomy chapter 8. I want you to look at this proving concept again. Deuteronomy chapter 8. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 2. Moses once again speaking to the nation Israel here. And thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 days in the wilderness, to humble thee and to prove thee, to know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldest keep his commandments or no. See the proving concept in the middle there? But look at all the other amplifying terminology around it there to help you appreciate what's going on when God's proving Israel. To humble thee and to prove thee. Man, if you humble someone, or if you're humbled yourself, you really, you don't think very much of yourself in that sense that I'm great and I'm good and I can do this and all this business here. Pride and arrogance and self-sufficiency and so forth are set aside. you're humbled and everything, you realize that you don't have the capacity to do what you think you can do, and you aren't necessarily who you think you might be. And that's what God's doing here. He's proving them. He's humbling them and proving them, making them realize that the only way they're ever going to be great in the Lord is when they have a full understanding and appreciation of His Jehovah-ness and realize that their greatness is in His Jehovah-ness and grace to them. Their greatness isn't because intrinsically within themselves there's something that endeared them to God. No. Their greatness is in God's Jehovah-ness and grace extended to them simply because of who and what He is. To humble thee and prove thee, to know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldest keep His commandments or no. See, that's the issue. God's going to prove them in that education system, in those trials for their education, Exodus 15 through 18, before they ever get there. And He's going to prove before they ever get to Mount Sinai whether they'll keep that thing or not. And He proves that they won't. He proves that they can't. But they, in the hardness of their heart and their stiff-neckedness, even at this time in their history, refuse to believe that. Deuteronomy chapter 8 once again. Well, for time's sake here, well, come on down, yeah. Come on down to verse 14. Then thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God. This is the opposite of humbling once again. Which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led thee through that great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water, who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint. By the way, folks, we'll eventually get to it. I just pointed out now because it just comes to my mind as I read a passage like this. There's a parallel between what's going to be going on out there in the day of the Lord, last half of it especially, what we commonly call the Great Tribulation period. There's a parallel between what's going to be going on out there, what the remnant of Israel is going to suffer out there, and what went on back in the wilderness there after they signed that law contract. You notice the reference there to the issue of the great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water, and so forth. There's a passage we'll eventually look at, I hope to, when it comes to dealing with a survey of that time out there. There's passages in Isaiah and in Jeremiah and in other of those fifth course of punishment prophets that describe the similarity and the repeat of the things that went on back at this time here going on again out there. You understand and you appreciate that. That you're able to really appreciate those signs the Lord speaks about there in Mark chapter 16, talking about the issue of taking up deadly serpents and handling them and so forth, and not hurting them, drinking deadly things and all this, but not hurting them and so forth. The Lord said all that once again in view of that time being right around the corner. Dispensation of grace once again has interrupted the program with the nation of Israel, and all that's still future and everything. But that wasn't the case back here at the time the Lord spoke those things at the end of Mark's gospel there, just before He ascended back to the Father. Israel's last days were dawning upon them, and the things in connection with the tribulation period were dawning upon them, and they were going to be going through the same things all over again. It's when they came out of Egypt and wandered through the wilderness. And the Lord makes provision for the believing remnant and declares those things in Mark 16 concerning that time out there. None of those things will apply in the dispensation of grace, and it's foolish for a Christian to ever try and make those things apply or think that they're supposed to apply. But we'll eventually have reason to talk about that, and well, let's just get on here. Who led thee through that great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water, who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint, who fed thee in the wilderness with manna which thy fathers knew not, that He might humble thee, and that He might prove thee, to do thee good at thy latter end. I want you to notice once again the manna issue there. The manna comes up in chapter 17 there. Pardon me, chapter 16 there in Exodus. The manna arrives, that's where it begins. But the issue once again was humbling them and proving them in connection with that. And that's the incident. In a 24-hour period, the Lord proves their inability to be dealt with by Him on the basis of a law contract. Well, that's what's going on now. The trials for their education are dealing with this. It's producing this, the proving of them, knowing what's in their heart, whether they could ever be dealt with on the basis of a contract like that, and proving that the only hope they ever have is for God to deal with them on the basis of His Jehovahness and His grace. Come on back there one more time. Exodus chapter 15 or 16 now. Once again, like I said, we're just kind of hitting the highlights in connection with these things. I would encourage you to spend a great deal more time pursuing these things and giving thoughtful consideration to the details you have here. Chapter 16, once again. An entire chapter now is taken up with the issue of their hunger in the wilderness of sin here. And let's just get down to the details of it. The hunger comes upon them once again in verse 2 there. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full. For ye have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. That's kind of amazing here. Just a little while ago, you can figure out exactly how many days it was by the time factors that are given to you there at the beginning of chapter 16. Just a little while ago, God provided for them in connection with giving them water. You'd think that the natural response here would have been to at least remember that and to have come along and said, well, He provided water. Can He provide food? But there's no inkling that's what was going on. They murmur against Moses and against Aaron. They said we were better off back there in Egypt. Then we had the flesh pots to the full and all this business here. And look what they say at the end of verse 3. You've brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Didn't they all just sing a song back there in chapter 15 concerning why they were brought forth out of Egypt? Man alive. As far as they're concerned, all that's passé. That doesn't not make any effect upon them. Then said the Lord unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or not. Man, now you're getting right down to the brass tacks of the reason for this whole thing. Notice once again, just as back there at the end of chapter 15, with the statute, the ordinance, the commandment, and whole system, the issue is a law. It hasn't come yet once again, but the education regarding how it's going to operate and what it takes to be dealt with in the base of that thing is being given to the nation here right now. When they sign that law contract, folks, they don't sign that thing on the dotted line in ignorance as to what they're doing. They sign on the dotted line, they're knowing perfectly well what that thing calls for. And they sign it in the stubbornness of their heart, the stiff-neckedness of their necks, and their refusal to believe what God told them about themselves back here at this time. This incident here in chapter 16, the manna once again. Here it comes, he gives them specific directions regarding this thing. It shall come to pass that on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in. It shall be twice as much as they gather daily. He's going to rain bread from heaven, the manna once again for them. It's going to come on a daily basis on the 6th day. It's going to come, as it says there, and then on the 6th day they shall prepare that which they bring in, and it shall be twice as much as they gather daily. That provides once again for the Sabbath and so forth there. And Moses and Aaron said unto all the children of Israel, At even shall ye know that the Lord hath brought you out of the land of Egypt in the morning. Then you'll see the glory of the Lord. For the glory of the Lord, the glory of His Jehovahness is what they're going to see. He's providing for them. For that He heareth your murmurings against the Lord. And what are we that we murmur against us? And Moses and Aaron are pointing the finger right at what's going on here. You're not murmuring against us, you're murmuring against the Lord here. And you're complaining against the issue of what His name declares concerning Himself. And you're not appreciating the issue of His Jehovahness, His unlimited capacity to be what you need Him to be, and provide for you what you need provisions for. And then in verse 8 and everything, Moses starts going over the details of the gathering of this and so forth, and not leaving it till the next day and all this business. And also the issue concerning the quails and all this. And we're running out of time here as far as being able to appropriately and properly deal with this. I want to get down, though, in the last few minutes we have in this hour to the issue of the manifestation of their inability to keep the Lord's law. I want you to recognize, come back with me one more time to verse 4, that I may prove them. Notice he says, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they'll walk in my law or not. He's going to give them a statute regarding the certain rate. He's going to give them a commandment regarding the certain rate. You gather it like this. You don't keep it this long. You don't you gather it for a certain number of days. Don't expect it on the Sabbath, and this kind of business. Come on down if you would here. Verse 14, and when the dew that lay was gone up, behold, upon the face of the wilderness there lay a small round thing, as small as the hoarfrost on the ground. And when the children of Israel saw it, they said one to another, it is manna, for they wist not what it was. And Moses said unto them, this is the bread which the Lord hath given you to eat. This is the thing which the Lord hath commanded. Here's the command once again. This is the way by which they're going to be proven. Gather of it every man according to his eating, and homer for every man according to the number of persons. Take ye every man for them which are in his tents. And the children of Israel did so, and gathered, some more, some less. And when they did meet it with an omer, he that gathered much had nothing over, and he that gathered little had no lack. Perfect provisions once again in connection with it. They gathered every man according to his eating. And Moses said, let no man leave it till the morning. There it is. There's another part of the command. You gather it at a certain rate, and no man leave it until the morning. Look at verse 20. Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto Moses, but some of them left of it until the morning, and it bred worms and stank. And Moses was wroth with them. And they gathered it every morning, every man according to his eating, and when the sun waxed hot, it melted. And it came to pass that on the 6th day they gathered twice as much, 2 omers for one man. And all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. And he said unto them, this is that which the Lord hath said. Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath of the Lord. Bake ye that which ye will bake today, and seethe that which ye will seethe, and that which remaineth over it lay up for you to be kept until the morning. And they laid it up until the morning, as Moses bade, and it did not stink, neither was there any worm therein. Perfect provision once again the Lord's making. And Moses said, eat that today, for today is a Sabbath unto the Lord. Today ye shall not find it in the field. 6 days ye shall gather it, but on the 7th day, which is a Sabbath, in it there shall be none. And it came to pass that there went out some of the people on the 7th day for to gather, and they found none. Well, that's brilliant, isn't it? They've just been told the commandment of the Lord and how things are going to be, and just like they originally didn't hearken when it came to the stuff putrefying and so forth, now they're not hearkening, and when it came to the 7th day issue. Now look at the response there in verse 28. And the Lord said unto Moses, how long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? I want you to notice 2 things there. Notice your ye. How long refuse ye? The Lord said that to Moses, but the words are directed to the people out there as a whole. Second person plural. How long refuse ye, you people, you my people, you nation, how long refuse you to keep my commandments and my laws? So there's the issue now. A week's span of time has gone by here. And they've demonstrated their refusal to hearken and to pay exact attention to what God says and not do what he said. And God let it come right down to the issue of the Sabbath day there, and they manifested it again. He told them that he's given them this to prove whether they're walking his laws or not, and he's proven that they won't do it. They can't and they won't. How long refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? See, for that the Lord hath given you the Sabbath, therefore he giveth you on the 6th day the bread of 2 days. Abide ye every man in his place. Let no man go out of his place on the 7th day. So the people rested on the 7th day. Well, this is the second trial for their education, folks. And it takes the issue of that first trial with the statute, the commandment, and the proving concept, and it brings it to a head. And this is the first time in the trial that he manifests their impotency in connection with being dealt with by him on the basis of commandments, performance, keeping his judgments, and so forth. And he words it in such a way there in verse 28 as to express the impossibility they have of ever being dealt with on that basis and succeeding. How long, he says, refuse ye to keep my commandments and my laws? Man. The issue is, they gotta acknowledge that's just what they've done. And if he said, I gave you this thing to prove you, what have I proven? I've proven you can't do it. I've proven that what's in your heart isn't what you think is there. You've got no capacity to be what my prime purpose calls for on the basis of your own performance. Now that's the second trial. And that one proves them. The other three come along and just underscore that. And we'll have to begin to see them next time. I want to go through them, at least in the basics once again, because I really want you to have a full appreciation of what happens when they come to Mount Sinai there and sign that law contract. And it's only by understanding and appreciating this to at least this degree that we're looking at, this simple degree to which we're looking at it, that those 5 courses of curses in Leviticus 26 will ever make the sense to you they're supposed to make. And you'll see how important that passage, the only way you'll really see how important that passage is to understand the things we're going over here first. Okay. For next time, I'd like you to at least read through Exodus 15, 16, 17, and 18. I know I asked you to do that once already. If you haven't done it, be able to go through it all, at least go through it once there. And the more that you're familiar with things, the better off it always is. Because when I point them out to you and we look at them together, it's not that you're seeing them for the first time. And more comprehension will be had by you when you do things that way. Okay. Let's stop the study here at this particular point. Next time, in the next lesson, lesson number 6, we'll pick it up here in Exodus chapter 17, pick up the last 3 trials, and then deal with what took place at Mount Sinai there. Deal with the law contract for what it is. We'll also see some auxiliary statements that are made there concerning the plan and purpose God has for Israel. I'll tell you about some other things that you need to be able to look at on your own in connection with major events and major issues that take place. But then we'll begin to look at that critical passage in Leviticus 26.